Shall we, Cecilia?
Oh, Edmund, yes. Oh, why is that his namesake?
He'll regret losing you.
The first 3 months of marriage to Sebastian Aldrich Voss were, by every external measure, a triumph. The Duchess of Ravenmoor, and Evangeline was still learning to answer to the title without a fraction of delay that betrayed how recently it had become hers, occupied one of the finest residences in London and the ancestral seat of Ravenmoor in the Northumberland countryside. She had a husband who consulted her on estate decisions, who remembered the names of books she mentioned in passing and had them delivered to her study without announcement, and who looked at her across crowded rooms with the particular focused intensity that she had once found unsettling and now found necessary, like oxygen or morning light. Society had adjusted. Not warmly. Society never adjusted warmly to anything that disrupted its preferred narratives, but with the pragmatic efficiency of a system that recognized when the cost of exclusion exceeded the cost of acceptance. The Duke of Ravenmoor had married Evangeline Ashford, and the Duke of Ravenmoor was not a man whose wife could be comfortably ignored. Invitations arrived. Doors opened. People who had whispered about the Hartwell ball now whispered about how well she carried herself, which was a different kind of scrutiny, but scrutiny nonetheless. Evangeline navigated all of it with the composure she had spent her entire life developing, and the quiet awareness that composure, however effective, was not the same thing as peace. Because underneath the triumph, something was shifting. Not between her and Sebastian. What existed between them was solid and specific, and built on the kind of honesty that most marriages in their circle did not even attempt. He was not a man who performed affection, but he was a man who demonstrated it. In the parliamentary brief left on her breakfast table with a note that read your thoughts before Thursday, in the way he stood slightly closer to her than etiquette required at public events, in the quality of silence they had learned to share in the library at Ravenmoor, that felt less like absence and more like presence. No, the shift was coming from outside, and it wore the face of a woman Evangeline had underestimated. Welcome back to Duke Royal Tales, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Part 2 is here, and it is going to test everything. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in October, 6 months after the wedding. Evangeline was in her study at the London house, a room Sebastian had given her without being asked, cleared of its previous function as a secondary storage room for parliamentary papers and refitted with a writing desk, bookshelves, and the particular shade of sage green wallpaper she had once mentioned preferring in a conversation she hadn't realized he was cataloging. The letter was addressed to her in handwriting she did not recognize. No return name. Cream envelope, expensive paper sealed with unmarked wax. She opened it with the silver letter knife Sebastian had given her as a wedding gift. Practical, elegant, engraved with her new initials, and unfolded a single sheet. The words were brief. Your Grace, I write to you not with malice but with concern. There are aspects of your husband's history that were not, I believe, shared with you before your marriage. I refer specifically to the matter of Lady Helena Ashworth and the events of the winter of 1811. You deserve to know the full measure of the man you married, a friend. Evangeline read it twice. Then she set it on the desk, aligned it precisely with the edge, and sat back in her chair. She did not know the name Lady Helena Ashworth. She had never heard it spoken in any context, not by Sebastian, not by the society gossips who had dissected every element of their courtship with forensic enthusiasm, not by the Countess of Aldermere, who knew everything about everyone and shared it with strategic selectivity. The absence of the name was, itself, information. People whose histories contained nothing consequential did not generate anonymous letters. Evangeline looked at the letter for a long time. Then she folded it, placed it in the desk drawer she reserved for things that required careful thought, and went downstairs to breakfast. Sebastian was already at the table. He was reading correspondence. 3 letters open beside his plate, a cup of coffee growing cold at his elbow, his dark near-black hair still slightly damp from his morning routine, the sharp lines of his face set in the particular concentration he gave to anything that demanded his precise attention. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning," he said, and something in the way he said it, the brief, involuntary softening of his gray eyes, the way his gaze tracked her as she crossed the room, still had the capacity to rearrange something in her chest that she had thought was permanently settled. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat across from him. She poured her tea, buttered her toast, opened the morning paper. Read 3 paragraphs about a debate in the Commons without absorbing a word. "You're quiet," Sebastian said. "I'm reading." "You're holding the paper at a 45-degree angle. You read at 60. A pausa. Something's bothering you." She set the paper down. This was the thing about being married to a man who paid attention with the precision of a military strategist. Nothing went unobserved. Nothing went unanalyzed. It was, depending on the day, either the most comforting or the most disconcerting element of their partnership. Today it was disconcerting. "Who is Lady Helena Ashworth?" she asked. The silence that followed was not long, 3 seconds at most. But Evangeline had learned to read Sebastian's silences the way other people read sentences, and this one contained something she had not encountered before. Not guilt, exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the territory between a thing deliberately concealed and a thing not yet found the right moment to reveal. Sebastian set his coffee cup down. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He folded his correspondence, placed his hands flat on the table, looked at her directly. "Helena Ashworth was someone I knew. Before you. Before most of the life I currently recognize as mine." "Knew," Evangeline repeated. "Was engaged to," Sebastian said. "Briefly, 7 years ago." The information landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Evangeline held his gaze. "You were engaged before?" "Yes, and you didn't tell me." "I intended to." His voice was measured but not defensive. The timing was never... He stopped, recalibrated. "That's not accurate. The timing was available. I chose not to use it because the subject is not one I discuss easily, and I was aware that introducing it during our courtship would have added a complication I wasn't certain you needed." "You decided what I needed?" "I decided what I was capable of discussing," he said, and there was something raw in the correction that stopped her from pushing further immediately. "Which is not the same thing, and I recognize the distinction matters." The breakfast room was very quiet. Morning light fell across the white tablecloth and the silver tea service, and the space between them that had, for the first time since their wedding, acquired an unfamiliar texture. "What happened?" she asked. Sebastian was quiet for a moment that had weight. "She died," he said. The story came in pieces over the next hour. They moved from the breakfast room to the study. His study, the large dark-paneled room at the front of the house where he conducted the business of his estates and his parliamentary work. He sat in the leather chair behind his desk. She sat in the chair opposite. The desk between them was, she recognized, not accidental. He needed the structure of it, the slight formality, to say what he was about to say. Helena Ashworth had been the daughter of Viscount Ashworth, a family whose estate bordered the southern edge of Ravenmoor's Northumberland holdings. Sebastian had known her since childhood. She was 2 years younger, dark-haired, possessed of a particular sharp-edged warmth that he described with the careful precision of someone selecting each word to avoid giving too much or too little. They had become engaged in the autumn of 1011. Sebastian was 27. Helena was 25. The engagement was welcomed by both families and regarded by those who knew them as unusually well-matched. Not a strategic alliance, but something rarer, a genuine partnership between two people who understood each other. "She was ill," Sebastian said. His voice had not changed in volume or tempo, but Evangeline could hear the effort beneath it, the discipline required to keep the words level. A fever that came suddenly and did not respond to treatment. The physicians were optimistic for the first week. By the second week, they had stopped being optimistic and started being present, which is a different thing. "Sebastian, she died on the 14th day," he said. "In December. I was there. Her family was there. It was quiet and terrible and entirely outside anyone's control, which was, for me, the worst part of it." He paused. "I am not a man who manages helplessness well," he said. "I suspect you've noticed." Evangeline said nothing. She waited. "After Helena died, I spent approximately 3 years being precisely the kind of man the papers later described me as: cold, controlled, strategically detached from anything that required emotional investment. I built my political career during that period because politics rewards exactly the qualities that grief produces: precision, distance, the ability to function without reference to feeling." He looked at her across the desk. I did not tell you about Helena because I was not certain how to explain that the man you married was built, in significant part, on the architecture of a loss he has never fully discussed with anyone. And because I was afraid, he stopped. The word hung in the air, unfamiliar from his mouth. I was afraid that knowing the full scope of my history would make you wonder whether what I feel for you is love or simply the relief of not being alone anymore. The study was silent. Morning light moved slowly across the carpet. Evangeline looked at the man sitting across from her, this man who had crossed a ballroom to reach her, who had offered his arm without ceremony, who had built a courtship on precision and honesty, and the particular brand of devotion that expressed itself through attention rather than performance, and felt something in her chest crack open, not with pain but with the fierce, protective tenderness of understanding someone more completely than she had before. "Sebastian," she said. "Yes, I am not going to wonder that." He looked at her. His gray eyes held something she had only seen once before. On the steps of the reception house, the night he had told her he loved her. Vulnerability, offered without armor. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain that you love me," she said. "I'm also certain that you loved Helena, and I'm certain that those two things can exist in the same person without either of them being diminished." She paused. "I would have appreciated hearing this before our wedding, but I understand why I didn't, and I'm choosing to be angry about it for approximately 20 minutes and then move forward, because the alternative is letting a dead woman's ghost become a wedge between us, and I refuse to do that to her or to us." Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, something deeper and less composed. 20 minutes, he repeated. "I'm very efficient when I'm angry," she said. He exhaled. It was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him in a context that wasn't already warm, and it carried relief in a way that told her exactly how long he had been carrying this particular weight. "The letter," he said. "Who sent it?" "It was unsigned." "But you have a suspicion." Evangeline met his eyes. "I have the same suspicion you do." Lady Cecilia Vane had not, it appeared, accepted her defeat with the grace that society attributed to well-bred women. Sebastian confirmed what Evangeline had already deduced, that Cecilia had spent 2 years cultivating proximity to him before Evangeline entered the picture, not through direct pursuit, which would have been too visible, but through strategic social placement, mutual acquaintances, and the careful construction of availability that looked like coincidence. When Sebastian chose Evangeline, Cecilia had responded with the newspaper column. When the newspaper column failed to prevent the courtship, she had stepped back. When the wedding occurred, she had gone quiet. Quiet, Evangeline was learning, was not the same as finished. She would have learned about Helena through Edmund, Sebastian said. They were in the study together, the anonymous letter open on the desk between them. Fairfax and the Ashworth family share connections through the racing circuit. It wouldn't have been difficult. And she chose to deploy it now, Evangeline said. 6 months after the wedding, why? Because 6 months is when the social protection of novelty expires, Sebastian said. You're no longer the interesting new Duchess. You're the established one, the one who can be challenged without it appearing gauche. She wants to destabilize me. She wants to destabilize us, Sebastian corrected. You specifically, but the marriage generally. A duchess who doubts her husband is a duchess who can be isolated, and an isolated duchess is a vulnerability in my political position. Evangeline looked at him. You're analyzing this like a parliamentary strategy, because that's what it is, he said. Cecilia Vane is not operating from emotion. She's operating from calculated social ambition, and she has chosen the most efficient point of attack. The most efficient point of attack, Evangeline repeated slowly, being a dead woman your husband loved before you. Sebastian held her gaze without flinching, but she saw the flicker in his gray eyes, the recognition that his analytical framing, however accurate, had landed somewhere it shouldn't have. Yes, he said quietly, and I'm sorry for reducing it to strategy when it is also fundamentally about you and about Helena and about things that deserve more than tactical assessment. It was, she thought, one of the things she loved most about him, not that he was incapable of error, but that he recognized his errors with the same precision he applied to everything else, and corrected them without requiring her to insist. What do we do? She asked. We do nothing reactive, he said. Cecilia is waiting for a response. If you confront her, she becomes the victim of a jealous duchess. If I confront her, I confirm that Helena is a vulnerability. If we ignore it entirely, she escalates. Then what? Sebastian looked at the letter on the desk, then at Evangeline. We tell the truth, he said. Not to Cecilia, not to society, to the people who matter, on our terms, before she can shape the narrative for us. The dinner was held at the London house 3 weeks later. 20 guests, carefully selected. The Countess of Aldermere, who arrived with the expression of someone who had been briefed and was fully prepared to be useful. Lord and Lady Ashford, Evangeline's parents, who had been told about Helena privately by Evangeline and had responded with the quiet steadiness that she was realizing, where she had learned her own. 2 parliamentary allies of Sebastian's whose discretion was verified. Several couples whose social influence was significant and whose gossip networks were, by design, the ones most likely to propagate whatever version of events emerged from this evening. The dinner was exquisite. The conversation was warm. And at the appropriate moment, after the main course, before dessert, when the table had settled into the particular ease that good food and good company produced, Sebastian spoke. He did not stand. He did not make a speech. He simply turned the conversation, with the skill of someone who had been redirecting rooms for 15 years, toward the subject of loss. "My first engagement," he said, in response to a question from the Countess that had been precisely choreographed, ended with Helena Ashworth's death in 1811. She was extraordinary, and losing her was the defining event of my adult life until I met my wife. He said it plainly, without drama, without the theatrical vulnerability that society would have found suspicious. Just a fact, stated by a man who had decided that facts, delivered on his own terms, were the most effective defense against whatever distorted version was being assembled elsewhere. The table received it with the particular silence that indicated genuine feeling rather than performed sympathy. Then the Countess, with the social timing that had made her legendary, said, "Helena would have liked Evangeline enormously," in a tone that suggested personal knowledge, and the conversation moved forward with the warmth and naturalness of people who understood that grief and love were not competing forces but coexisting ones. Evangeline watched her husband from across the table and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since the anonymous letter arrived. Not because the threat had been neutralized. It had, but that was strategy. Because Sebastian had chosen, publicly and without hesitation, to be honest about the most painful chapter of his life, rather than let someone else weaponize it. And he had done it not for political advantage, though it served that purpose, but because Evangeline had shown him, in a breakfast room 3 weeks ago, that honesty between them was more important than comfort, and he had listened. After dinner, when the guests had moved to the drawing room and the evening had acquired the loose, comfortable energy of a successful gathering, Sebastian found her near the window. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm thinking that you handled that beautifully." "I handled it adequately," he said. "You handled the last 3 weeks beautifully, which is considerably more difficult." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" "I am precisely all right," he said, and the way he said it, with the faintest emphasis on the word precisely, as if he had measured his emotional state and found it, to his own surprise, exactly where it should be, made her reach for his hand. He took it, held it, did not let go for the remainder of the evening. Cecilia Vane's response came 10 days later, and it was not what Evangeline expected. She had anticipated escalation, another letter, perhaps, or a more public deployment of whatever additional information Cecilia had gathered. She had prepared for it with the careful composure that she had spent her life perfecting, and the new, harder edge that marriage to Sebastian had given her. Not because he had changed her, but because being fully seen by someone had made her more willing to be fully herself. Instead, she received a visit. Cecilia arrived at the London house at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, without prior notice, dressed in pale blue silk and carrying the particular expression of a woman who had prepared multiple versions of this conversation and was selecting between them in real time. Evangeline received her in the drawing room, alone. She did not summon Sebastian, who was at the Lord's. She did not call for her mother. She sat in the armchair by the fire and waited. Cecilia sat opposite her, arranged her skirts, and smiled. "Your Grace," she said. "Thank you for seeing me." "Lady Cecilia," Evangeline said. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "We don't. I came because I thought a direct conversation might be more useful than continued correspondence." "Continued correspondence," Evangeline repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe an anonymous letter designed to damage my marriage." Cecilia's smile did not waver, but something behind it recalculated. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. "Of course you don't." Evangeline folded her hands in her lap. "Then let me be direct, since you've come for directness. What do you want?" The drawing room was quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, the London afternoon moved past the windows with its usual grey indifference. Cecilia studied her for a moment. Then the smile dissolved, not into hostility, but into something more honest and considerably less attractive. "I want you to understand something," Cecilia said. "Sebastian Voss was never going to choose me. I knew that. I've known it for 2 years. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that he would choose someone like you." "Someone like me," Evangeline said. "Someone without strategic value," Cecilia said. "Someone whose family holds a minor title and whose social position before the Hartwell ball was precisely unremarkable. I spent 2 years learning exactly what Sebastian Voss valued in a partner, and you were none of it." "And yet," Evangeline said. "And yet," Cecilia agreed. The word carried something that might have been respect, buried under layers of resentment. "Which means either I misread him entirely, or he changed. And Sebastian Voss does not change." "He didn't change," Evangeline said quietly. "You misread him." The silence that followed was sharp and clean. Cecilia looked at her, really looked, for perhaps the first time, without the social screening that usually filtered her perception of other women. And Evangeline saw the moment the calculation shifted. "You're not afraid of me," Cecilia said. "No," Evangeline said. "I'm not. I was humiliated in front of 400 people by a man I trusted, and I survived it by standing still and deciding not to be destroyed. You are not more frightening than that moment, Lady Cecilia. Nothing is." Cecilia was quiet for a long time. Then she stood. "The letters will stop," she said. "Yes," Evangeline said. "They will." Cecilia moved toward the door, paused, turned. "He chose well," she said. It cost her something to say it. Evangeline could see the price of it in the set of her jaw, but she said it. Then she left. Evangeline sat in the drawing room for 10 minutes after the door closed. She did not move. She breathed. She felt the particular sensation of a battle won not through force or strategy, but through the simple, devastating act of being exactly who she was, and refusing to be diminished by someone else's assessment of her worth. When Sebastian came home that evening, she told him everything. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You handled that alone," he said. "Yes. You didn't need me." "No," she said. "But I wanted to tell you about it, which I think matters more." Something moved across his face, that rare, unguarded expression that she had learned to recognize as the one he wore when she surprised him in ways he hadn't anticipated and couldn't immediately categorize. "It does," he said. "It matters considerably more." The winter passed. Spring arrived at Ravenmoor with a particular gentle insistence that the Northumberland countryside brought to everything, slowly, thoroughly, and without concern for whether anyone was ready for it. Evangeline had established a rhythm at the estate that felt, for the first time in her life, genuinely her own. She rose early and walked the frost-covered grounds while the light was still thin and silver, a habit she had developed after Sebastian mentioned, once, that the morning silence at Ravenmoor was the closest thing he knew to peace. She had wanted to understand what he meant. She had found it immediately. She wrote in the mornings, not letters, though those continued, her correspondence with the Countess of Aldermere having evolved into something that resembled genuine friendship, but something else, something she had not told Sebastian about yet, though she suspected he knew, because Sebastian noticed everything, and had the particular tact to not mention the things he noticed, until she was ready to discuss them. She was writing about women's property law. Not a formal treatise. She had no credentials for that, and the legal establishment would have dismissed her on sight, but a careful, documented, accessible argument for reform, built on the research she had begun during her conversation with the Countess at the Aldermere supper, and expanded through months of reading and correspondence with 3 sympathetic solicitors whose names the Countess had provided with the satisfied expression of a woman whose social network served purposes far beyond social. Sebastian discovered the manuscript in April. Not by snooping, he was constitutionally incapable of that particular invasion, but because Evangeline left 3 pages on the breakfast table by accident, mixed in with his parliamentary correspondence, and he read them before realizing they weren't addressed to him. He appeared in her study doorway 20 minutes later, the 3 pages in his hand, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before and could not immediately categorize. "These are yours?" he said. "Yes, these are exceptional." She looked at him. His gray eyes were not performing admiration. She would have recognized that and been wary of it. They were expressing genuine, startled respect, the kind that came from encountering something unexpected and finding it better than anticipated. "They're a draft," she said. "They're a draft that argues more clearly and persuasively than anything currently before the Lords on this subject." He came into the room, set the pages on her desk. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the Aldermere supper, when the Countess mentioned the married women's property question. That was 11 months ago. I work slowly when something matters." Sebastian looked at the pages, then at her, then at the pages again. "Evangeline," he said, "this needs to be published." "I know," she said. And then, because she had been thinking about this for weeks and had arrived at a conclusion that felt both inevitable and terrifying, "And I need your help to do it without being immediately dismissed as the Duke of Ravenmoor's wife playing at politics." "You're not playing at anything," he said, "and anyone who reads this will know that within 3 paragraphs. The legal establishment doesn't read past the author's name if the name is female." "Then we address that," he said, with the particular focused energy she recognized as the one he deployed when a problem had been presented and he intended to solve it. "Not by hiding your name, by making it impossible to dismiss." She looked at him across the study that he had given her, this room with its sage-green wallpaper and its bookshelves and its desk, where she had built something entirely her own, and felt the full, settled weight of being married to a man who did not see her ambitions as competition to his own, but as an extension of something they were building together. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. And then, because Sebastian Voss was learning, slowly and with characteristic precision, to say the things he meant even when they made him vulnerable. "I love you in ways I didn't know I had capacity for, and watching you become this version of yourself has been the privilege of my life." She crossed the room and kissed him. It was not their first kiss. They had been married for a year, and the physical dimension of their marriage was as direct and honest as every other dimension, but it carried something particular: gratitude, recognition, the specific warmth of 2 people who had survived separate kinds of damage and found, in each other, not the absence of damage, but the willingness to build alongside it. The pamphlet was published in June, under her name, Evangeline Ashford Voss, Duchess of Ravenmoor, printed by a press that Sebastian's parliamentary contacts identified and Evangeline's arguments convinced. The Countess of Aldermere ensured it reached every drawing room, every parliamentary wife, and every reform-minded lord in London within a fortnight. The response was not uniform. Some praised it. Several legal scholars wrote responses that engaged with her arguments on their merits, which was, in the landscape of women's intellectual contributions to legal debate, extraordinary. 3 newspapers discussed it, 2 dismissively, 1 with genuine interest. The backlash came from predictable quarters. Evangeline was called presumptuous, which she found ironic given how frequently the word had appeared in her personal life. She was called ambitious, which she accepted as a compliment. She was called the Duke's political puppet, which annoyed Sebastian considerably more than it annoyed her. "They're saying I wrote it," he said one evening, the offending article open on his desk. "Let them," Evangeline said. "It undermines your authorship. It amplifies the argument," she said. "If people believe a duke wrote it, they'll take it more seriously. If they later learn a duchess wrote it, they'll have to reconcile their respect for the argument with their dismissal of its author. That's a more useful contradiction than any correction I could issue." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. "You're more strategically sophisticated than I am," he said. "I've had different training," she said. "Women learn strategy in drawing rooms. Men learn it in the Lords. The drawing room curriculum is considerably more advanced." He almost smiled. "Almost. I married the most dangerous person in England," he said. "You married the most dangerous person you'd met at that particular ball," she corrected. "The country is larger than one ballroom." In August, Lord Ashford fell ill. It came without warning. A cough that didn't clear, a weariness that didn't lift, and then a morning when he could not rise from bed, and the physician's face held the particular expression that Evangeline had learned from Sebastian's story about Helena, to recognize as the boundary between optimism and presence. Evangeline went to her parents' home immediately. Sebastian came with her. He did not need to come. Parliament was in session. His land reform bill was approaching a critical vote. There were 14 things on his schedule that week that required his physical presence in London, and he cancelled all of them with 3 sentences to his secretary, and no explanation beyond, "Lady Ashford is ill. I will be at the Ashford residence." Evangeline's mother met them at the door with the composed exterior and devastated eyes of a woman who had spent 40 years married to a man she loved and was now being asked to contemplate the arithmetic of his absence. Sebastian did 3 things in the first hour. He arranged for the best physician in London, not the most fashionable, the best, a distinction he made with characteristic precision, to attend Lord Ashford by evening. He spoke privately with Lady Margaret Ashford for 20 minutes, during which time Evangeline did not know what was said, but after which her mother's composure shifted from fragile performance to something more genuinely steady. And he sat with Lord Ashford for 30 minutes, alone, at the older man's bedside. When he came out of that room, his face was carefully composed, but his eyes were not. "He's strong," Sebastian said to Evangeline. "How strong?" "Strong enough to argue with me about the Whitmore Amendment," he said, "which I'm choosing to interpret as diagnostic." Despite everything, she almost smiled. Lord Ashford recovered, slowly, stubbornly, and with the particular determination of a man who had been told by a duke that his parliamentary opposition was still needed and had apparently taken this as a medical directive. The 3 weeks of his illness were, for Evangeline, a crucible, not because of the fear, though the fear was constant and heavy and sat in her chest like something physical, but because of what the fear revealed. She watched Sebastian move through a crisis that was not his own with the same precision and focus he brought to everything, but without the distance. He was not performing competence. He was not managing the situation. He was present, fully, specifically present, in a way that told her he understood that Lord Ashford was not merely his father-in-law or a parliamentary colleague, but the father of the woman he loved, and that this distinction mattered to him in a way that exceeded strategy. He brought Evangeline tea at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. He did not say, "It will be fine," because he did not traffic in reassurances he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he said, "I'm here," which was both simpler and more useful, and he said it every time she needed to hear it, which was often, and which she was learning not to be ashamed of. One night at 3 in the morning, sitting in the hallway outside her father's room because the bedroom was too far away and the chair by his bed was occupied by her mother, Evangeline leaned against Sebastian's shoulder and said, "I don't know how to do this." "You're already doing it," he said, "badly. There is no version of this that feels adequate," he said. "That's not a failure of yours. It's a feature of loving someone." She pressed her face against his coat. "Helena," she said quietly. He was very still. "When she was ill," Evangeline said. "Did anyone sit with you?" The silence that followed was long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "No," he said finally. "I sat alone." She reached for his hand in the dark hallway. "Not anymore," she said. His hand tightened around hers. He said nothing. But she felt it, the thing he couldn't say, the gratitude and the grief and the love so large it had no adequate container. And she held his hand and stayed exactly where she was. Autumn brought 2 things. The first was Lord Ashford's return to the Lords, thinner but determinedly upright, leaning on a cane he claimed was decorative, and everyone else recognized as structural. Sebastian walked beside him into the chamber and did not offer his arm, which Lord Ashford appreciated more than any gesture of assistance could have communicated. They disagreed on 3 motions that week. Lord Ashford won 2 of them. Sebastian described the losses as instructive, which was as close as he came to admitting he had been outmaneuvered. The second thing Autumn brought was a letter from Cecilia Vane, not anonymous this time, addressed to Evangeline directly, in Cecilia's own handwriting. "Your Grace, I have read your pamphlet on women's property rights. I found it persuasive in ways I did not expect and did not welcome, because agreeing with you requires acknowledging that you possess qualities I spent considerable energy refusing to see. I am not writing to apologize. I suspect you would find an apology from me both late and insufficient, and I would find the act of delivering one insincere, which serves neither of us. I am writing to tell you that I have shared your pamphlet with Lady Ashworth, Helena's mother, who asked me to convey that she found it extraordinary and that she believes Helena would have been, in her words, fiercely proud to know the woman who came after her. That is all." Cecilia Vane Evangeline read it twice. Then she sat at her desk for a very long time, holding the letter, feeling something she had not anticipated, not forgiveness, which was too simple and too complete for what existed between her and Cecilia Vane, but the complicated, specific recognition that people were capable of growth, even people who had tried to damage you, and that acknowledging their growth did not require diminishing your own experience of the damage. She showed the letter to Sebastian that evening. He read it in silence, set it down, looked at the fire. "Helena's mother," he said. "Yes. I haven't spoken to her in 7 years. Would you like to?" He was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said. "I think I would." They visited Lady Ashworth in November. The Ashworth estate in Northumberland was 40 minutes by carriage from Ravenmoor, through countryside that Sebastian had ridden as a young man and had not visited since Helena's funeral. Evangeline watched him from across the carriage as they traveled and saw the particular quality of attention he gave the landscape. Not nostalgia, which would have been sentimental, but recognition, which was honest. Lady Ashworth was 63, silver-haired, and possessed of the same sharp-edged warmth that Sebastian had described in Helena. She received them in a sitting room that contained, among its many portraits and photographs, a small watercolor of a dark-haired young woman with intelligent eyes and a smile that suggested she had just said something witty and was waiting to see if you'd caught it. Evangeline looked at the portrait and felt no jealousy. What she felt was sadness, clean, uncomplicated sadness for a woman she had never met, who had died too young and had been loved by a man who carried that love with the same precision he carried everything else. Lady Ashworth took both of Sebastian's hands when he entered and held them for a long moment without speaking. "You look well," she said finally. "I am well," he said, and then with the directness that Evangeline loved most about him. "I should have come before now." "You came when you were ready," Lady Ashworth said. Helena would have understood that. She always understood your timing, even when it was terrible. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, and not quite pain, but existed in the exact space between them. They stayed for 3 hours. Lady Ashworth served tea and asked about the estate and discussed Evangeline's pamphlet with the informed enthusiasm of a woman who had always cared about the world and had never been given an adequate platform to say so. She told Evangeline 3 stories about Helena that were funny and warm and specific, and Evangeline listened and laughed and understood that these stories were being given to her as a gift, not because she needed to know Helena, but because Helena deserved to be known by the woman who now occupied the spaces she would have filled. On the carriage ride home, Sebastian was quiet. Evangeline waited. "Thank you," he said eventually. "For what?" "For not needing me to be a man without a past in order to love the man I am now." She looked at him across the carriage, this man with his gray eyes and his sharp cheekbones and his carefully constructed walls that had, over the course of a year, developed doors and windows and the occasional skylight, and she felt the full, complicated, extraordinary weight of loving someone completely. Not in spite of their history, but in full possession of it. "Sebastian," she said, "yes, your past is not a liability. It never was. It's the thing that taught you how to love carefully, and loving carefully is the reason we work." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the carriage, sat beside her instead of opposite, took her hand, and held it for the remaining 40 minutes without speaking. It was, she thought, the most eloquent thing he had ever said. December came. The anniversary of Helena's death passed quietly. Sebastian visited her grave alone in the morning, and returned in the afternoon with windswept hair and steady eyes, and the particular settled quality of a man who had honored something without being consumed by it. Evangeline was in the library when he came home, curled in the window seat, their window seat, the one from Pemberton that had somehow replicated itself at Ravenmoor, as if the house understood what they needed, with a book she was only partially reading. He came in, sat in the armchair by the fire, their armchair, the one that had been his since before she existed in this house, and now existed in relation to her window seat the way certain astronomical bodies exist in relation to each other. Fixed, proximate, gravitationally inevitable. They did not speak for 30 minutes. It was the most comfortable 30 minutes she had spent in company since the last time they had done exactly this. "Evangeline," he said eventually. "Yes, I have something to tell you." She looked up from her book. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not the focused intensity, not the carefully measured honesty, not the rare unguarded warmth. Something new. Something that looked, if she was reading him correctly, like wonder. "What is it?" she said. "I am happy," he said. The words were simple, 2 syllables. A statement so ordinary that most people said it without thinking, the way they said good morning, or it looks like rain. Sebastian Voss had never said it before. Not to her. Not, she suspected, to anyone. Not in the 35 years of his precisely managed, architecturally constructed, strategically defended life. And he was saying it now, in a library in Northumberland, on the anniversary of the worst day of his personal history, to the woman he had walked toward across a crowded ballroom because she had the look of someone deciding whether to be destroyed or not. Evangeline set her book down. "Say it again," she said. "I am happy," he said, and this time something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, not quite anything else, but entirely his, and his gray eyes held hers with the full, focused, devastating attention that she had learned to recognize as the way Sebastian Voss loved. She crossed the room, sat on the arm of his chair, leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good," she said. "So am I." Outside, the Northumberland winter pressed against the windows, and the fire burned low, and the library held them both in the particular silence that was not absence but presence, and Evangeline Ashford Voss, who had once stood alone in a blazing ballroom while the world collapsed around her, sat beside the man who had chosen her, wholly and completely and with every precise, deliberate, carefully honest part of himself, and felt, for the first time in her life, not just chosen but home. And that, besties, is part two. If part one was about being seen, part two is about being known, fully, completely, with every shadow and every scar, and being loved, not in spite of those things, but because of them. Evangeline didn't just survive the storm. She became the woman who could sit in the quiet after it and know, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And Sebastian, the cold Duke, the Iron Duke, the man who built his entire life on the architecture of loss, finally learned that strength isn't the ability to stand alone. It's the willingness to let someone stand beside you. Tell me in the comments, which moment hit you hardest this time? Was it Sebastian saying, "I sat alone"? Was it Evangeline facing Cecilia without flinching? Was it that final moment in the library when he said the two words he'd never said before? I read every single comment, every one. If you haven't already, subscribe right now because part 3 is coming, and I promise you, you are not ready. Hit the like button if Sebastian and Evangeline own your whole heart. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being fully known is not a risk. It's the whole point. Drop your flag below. Tell me where you're watching from. This family gets bigger every single day. Until next time, besties, know your worth, protect your peace, and never let anyone convince you that your past disqualifies you from your future. Duke Royal Tales. Always.